The chain on my lake gate was still warm when I grabbed it. Fresh weld. Fresh paint. And a brand new sign bolted into my fence that read private HOA access, members only. I could hear music drifting across the water. Laughter. Glass clinking. Someone had already turned my shoreline into a party. I stood there with my hand on that chain, trying to figure out when my own land stopped belonging to me. The gravel crunched behind me. I turned. A security guard in a pressed uniform stepped into my path like he'd been waiting. Clipboard in hand. Eyes flat. "You can't go through there, sir." Sir. Like I was a stranger. Like I didn't know every inch of this place. The lake stretched out behind him, catching the late afternoon sun. Same water my grandfather dug out with rented equipment and a stubborn back. Same dock I rebuilt 2 summers ago. Now it had a neat white sign hanging off the side. HOA property. That word hit different. Property. I glanced past him. There were people on my dock. Kids jumping off the edge. A couple sitting in chairs where my dad used to fish at sunrise. No one looked like they were trespassing. That's what made it worse. "I live here," I said. My voice came out steady. Too steady. The guard didn't even blink. He flipped a page on his clipboard. Ran his finger down a list like he was checking off groceries. "Name?" I told him. He scanned again. Slow. Careful. Then he shook his head. "Not on the list. Not on the list." I let that sit for a second. The smell of lake water mixed with fresh paint and something chemical from the new posts. Everything looked cleaner than it should. Too new. Too planned. That's when I noticed the fence line. It wasn't where it used to be. Not even close. It cut across the land at an angle I'd never seen before. Straight through a patch of ground I knew by memory. Something was off. I stepped closer. The guard shifted with me. Not aggressive. Just firm. Like this had already been decided somewhere I wasn't invited to. "You need a membership badge," he said. Membership. For my own lake. I almost laughed, but nothing came out. Instead, I looked past him again. That's when I saw her. Victoria Hale. Standing. Near the waterline in a white outfit that caught the sun just right. Perfect posture. Perfect smile. The kind that never reached her eyes. She raised a glass slightly when she saw me. Not a wave. Not a greeting. Something else. Like she'd been expecting this exact moment. I felt my grip tighten on the chain. Metal pressed into my palm. The weld seam was still rough. They hadn't even tried to hide how fast this went up. Overnight, maybe. 2 days at most. You don't move a fence like that without paperwork. Permits. Surveys. None of this happens quietly. Unless someone wants it to. The wind shifted off the lake. Carried a different sound this time. A low hum from somewhere behind the trees. I followed it with my eyes. And that's when I saw the new structure rising above the ridge line. It hadn't been there last week. Not even close. My jaw tightened. Because I suddenly realized, this wasn't just about a fence. I did not take my eyes off that structure on the ridge. It rose above the trees like it had always been there, but I knew better. The lines were too clean. The roof too sharp. Fresh lumber still catching the light. You do not build something that size without noise. Without trucks. Without time. Yet somehow, it appeared while I was gone for 3 days. That was the first thing that did not sit right. I stepped back from the gate, letting the chain fall against the metal with a dull clink. The guard watched me like I might try something. I did not. Not yet. I turned instead and walked along the fence line. Slow. Counting steps without thinking about it. The dirt felt packed in places it should have been loose. New posts every 8 feet. Perfect spacing. Someone had planned this down to the inch. That was not neighborhood work. That was professional. I crouched near one of the posts and brushed the soil with my fingers. It was still soft underneath. Recently disturbed. No grass roots holding it together. This had gone up fast. Too fast. I stood and followed the fence farther. It cut across the slope, ignoring the natural curve of the land. Whoever mapped this did not care about the terrain. They cared about something else. Lines. Boundaries. Control. I stopped when I reached the old oak tree. My oak tree. I carved my initials into that bark when I was 12. The mark was still there, faded but visible. But the fence ran 3 feet past it now. 3 feet inside what I knew was my side. I did not need a survey to feel that was wrong. I just knew. A truck door slammed somewhere behind me. I turned and saw a white utility pickup parked near the new structure. 2 men in reflective vests were unloading something from the back. Long pipes. Maybe railing. Maybe something else. They moved like they belonged there. No hesitation. No questions. That meant permits. Or at least something that looked like permits. My jaw tightened again. I pulled my phone out and opened the county parcel map. Signal was weak out here, but it loaded enough to show the outlines. Thin lines over satellite images. My land was supposed to stretch all the way to the water. Always had. But the overlay on my screen showed a different line now. Shifted. Clean. Artificial. It matched the fence. Exactly. I zoomed in, then out. Tried to refresh it. Same result. That was not a mistake. That was a change. And changes like that do not happen overnight unless someone pushes them through. I looked back toward the lake. Victoria was still there. Watching. Not moving. Like she already knew what I was seeing. The music picked up again. Louder this time. Someone cheered as a boat engine turned over near the dock. My dock. I lowered the phone slowly. Because one thing became clear in that moment. This was bigger than a fence. Bigger than a sign. Someone had moved the line itself. And I had no idea how far it went. I kept staring at that map like it might fix itself. It did not. The line stayed where it was, clean and sharp, cutting through everything I knew by memory. I pinched the screen, zoomed in on the shoreline. The dock sat just inside the new boundary. Not mine anymore, at least on paper. That was not just a mistake. That was precise. I started walking back toward the gate, faster this time. Gravel shifted under my boots, that familiar crunch now sounding wrong. Like it did not belong to me either. The guard straightened when he saw me coming. Clipboard still in hand. Same blank expression. Sir, you need to step away from the restricted area. Restricted. I stopped a few feet from him. Close enough to see the small logo stitched on his sleeve. It matched the sign on the gate. Willow Ridge Estates HOA. I had never heard that name before last week. Now it was everywhere. Who approved this? I asked. He hesitated for half a second. Just enough to notice. Then he nodded toward the ridge. Toward that new building. All questions go through management. Management. That word landed heavy. I followed his gesture again. The structure looked bigger from this angle. Glass windows reflecting the lake. A deck wrapping around the side. People moving inside like it was already open for business. You do not build something like that without backing. Money. Permits. Signatures. A whole chain of approvals. I turned back to him. This land is private. He did not argue. Did not agree either. Just tapped his clipboard. Not according to our records. Our records. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Because that meant there were two versions of this place now. Mine. And theirs. And somehow, theirs was the one everyone else recognized. I stepped to the side, looking past him at the gate again. The lock was new. Thick steel. No rust. No scratches. They had not even tried to blend it in. This was meant to be seen. A statement. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old keys. The ones I had carried for years. I did not even know why. Habit, maybe. I held one up to the lock. It did not come close to fitting. That should not have surprised me. But it did. The guard shifted again, watching my hands now. Careful. Like he expected me to push further. I did not. I lowered the key slowly. Because something clicked in my head right then. Not the lock. Something else. If they changed the boundary on record, if they built this much this fast, then this was not a mistake. This was planned long before I showed up today. I looked back at Victoria. She was still standing near the water. Still watching. But now she was not smiling. Not exactly. It was something quieter. Like she was waiting for me to understand. The music cut out for a second. Just a second. Enough for the sound of a generator from the ridge to carry across the water. Low. Constant. New. I turned toward it again. Because one question kept repeating in my head. Who signed off on all of this? I did not answer the question out loud. I just turned and walked back toward my truck. Slow at first, then faster. Gravel popped under my boots, each step sharper than the last. The music behind me came back on, louder now, like nothing had happened. Like I had not just been locked out of my own land. I opened the truck door and reached for the folder under the passenger seat. Thick. Worn edges. I had not touched it in years. Property deeds. Survey maps. Old permits. The kind of paperwork most people forget about until it matters. I flipped it open right there, leaning against the door. The smell of paper and dust hit me. Familiar. Grounding. I pulled out the last survey we had done. 12 years ago. Clean lines. Clear boundaries. The lake sat dead center inside my property line. No overlap. No question. I ran my finger along the edge, tracing the boundary from the oak tree down to the water. It did not match what I saw on my phone. Not even close. That was the second thing that did not sit right. I grabbed another sheet. Older. Faded ink. Hand markings from before everything went digital. The line was the same. Always the same. Straight through the ridge. Straight past where that new building now stood. I looked up again. That structure sat right on top of where my boundaries should be. Not near it. Not close. Directly on it. That was not a coincidence. I pulled out my phone again and took a photo of the survey. Then another. My hands were steady. Too steady. That cold feeling settled deeper now. Because this was not just about them taking the lake. They had built something permanent. Something expensive. Something that assumed I would not push back. I closed the folder and tossed it onto the seat. Then I shut the door harder than I meant to. The sound echoed across the open land. A few people by the water glanced over. Victoria did not. She was already moving. Walking up from the shoreline toward the gate. Calm. Measured steps. Like she had all the time in the world. The guard stepped aside for her without a word. That told me everything I needed to know about who was in charge here. She stopped a few feet from the fence. Close enough that we did not have to raise our voices. Up close, the details were sharper. Perfect hair. Clean lines. Not a trace of uncertainty. You came back sooner than expected, she said. Her voice was smooth. Controlled. Like this was a scheduled meeting. Not a confrontation. I did not respond right away. I just held up the survey in my hand. The paper fluttered slightly in the breeze. This line, I said. It does not match what you built. She glanced at it. Just a quick look. Then back at me. No surprise. No confusion. That is an outdated document, she said. Outdated. The word hung there for a second. Too easy. Too practiced. I stepped closer to the fence. Close enough to see my reflection in the metal links. You moved a legal boundary, I said. That is not something you just update. She tilted her head slightly. Almost curious. We did not move anything, she said. We corrected it. Corrected. Another clean word. Like this was a paperwork issue. Not a land grab. The wind picked up again, carrying the sound of that generator from the ridge. Louder now. Constant. I looked past her toward the building. Workers still moving. Still building. No hesitation. That meant they believed this was already settled. Already theirs. I lowered the survey slowly. Because one thing became very clear in that moment. She was not bluffing. And that meant someone had already signed something I had never seen. The word corrected stayed in the air longer than it should have. I let it sit there between us, heavy and clean, like she had practiced saying it in front of a mirror. I looked past her again at the ridge. Workers were still moving. Tools clinking. That generator humming like it had been there for years. No one hesitated. No one looked over their shoulder. That meant confidence. Or protection. Maybe both. I shifted my weight and tucked the survey back into the folder. Slow. Deliberate. You do not just correct land lines, I said. My voice stayed even. You file. You notify. You get signatures. She did not blink. All procedures were followed, she said. Procedures. Another safe word. Clean. Empty. I watched her face for any crack. There was none. That was the problem. She believed this. Or she wanted me to believe she did. I glanced at the guard. Still standing off to the side, but closer now. Subtle. Like he was ready to step in if this turned into something else. I looked back at her. Who signed it? I asked. Simple question. Straight. She smiled then. Not wide. Just enough to show she had been waiting for that. The county approved the revised survey, she said. County. That hit different. That meant paperwork had moved. Offices. Records. People behind desks who stamp things without ever stepping on the land. I felt that cold weight shift again in my chest. Because if the county signed off, then this was not just some HOA overreach. This had a trail. I pulled my phone back out and opened the map again. Zoomed in on the boundary. Same line. Same shift. I flipped over to the assessor records. Ownership data. Parcel numbers. The screen took a second to load. Then it filled in. My name still sat on the main parcel. But the edge near the lake had a new subdivision marker. Split. Clean. Like someone had taken a knife to it. I stared at that split line. It did not belong there. It had never been there. You subdivided it, I said. Not a question. Her smile did not change. The land was reclassified, she said. Reclassified. Another word that sounded small but meant everything. I scrolled through the record details. Dates. Filing numbers. It all looked official. Too official. Like it had been sitting there long enough to feel permanent. But I knew something she did not. I knew exactly when I had last checked these records. 2 months ago. There was no split then. None. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. The lake behind her caught the light again. Same water. Same reflections. But now it felt like I was looking at it through glass. Separated. I took a breath and let it out slow. No point raising my voice. Not here. Not now. You built on land that was not yours, I said. She tilted her head again, that same almost curious motion. According to current records, she said, it is. Current records. There it was. That was the whole game. Not what was true. What was recorded. I looked down at the fence line again. The posts. The spacing. The angle. Every inch of it matched the new map. That meant they had the updated survey before the build even started. Which meant this did not begin last week. Or last month. This had been moving long before I ever noticed. I lifted my eyes back to hers. Because one thought kept pushing forward now. If the records changed that fast, then someone made sure I would not see it happen. The word reclassified kept circling in my head as I stood there. It sounded official. Harmless, even. But I knew what it really meant. Someone had rewritten the story of my land without ever stepping on it. I glanced back toward my truck. The folder sat on the seat, slightly open, papers shifting in the breeze. Old records. Real records. The kind that do not just disappear because someone files something new. I walked back to it without another word. Victoria did not stop me. That was the first thing that felt strange. If she truly believed everything was settled, she should have pushed harder. Instead, she let me walk. I reached into the truck and pulled out another document. Thicker. Heavier. The original deed transfer from my grandfather. The paper had weight to it. Raised seal still visible along the edge. I held it up just enough for her to see. Not waving it. Just enough. This land has not changed hands in 70 years, I said. My voice stayed low. Even. The kind of tone you use when you already know the answer. She glanced at it, then back at me. Still calm. Still composed. Ownership is not the only factor, she said. Not the only factor. That phrase stuck. Because she was right in a way that did not make sense yet. I stepped closer to the fence again, this time ignoring the guard. He shifted, but did not block me. Not this time. That told me something else had changed in the last few seconds. I looked down at the base of the fence where it met the ground. The posts were not just placed. They were set deep. Reinforced. This was not temporary. This was meant to stay. I crouched again, brushing the dirt back with my hand. Beneath the loose top layer, I hit something solid. Concrete. Fresh. Still slightly damp along the edges. I rubbed my fingers together. Fine grit. Recent work. Very recent. I stood back up slowly. Because that confirmed it. They did not just plan this ahead. They rushed it at the end. Like they were racing a clock. I turned my head toward the ridge again. The generator sound cut slightly, then picked back up. A fluctuation. Small. But enough to notice. That meant active work. Not finishing touches. Active construction. I shifted my focus to the edge of the structure. That was when I saw it. A temporary permit board posted near the side. White panel. Black lettering. Standard county format. I narrowed my eyes, trying to read it from a distance. The wind shifted again, just enough to clear the angle. I could make out the permit number. The date stamped below it. My stomach dropped a fraction. Not much. Just enough to register. Because that date was recent. Too recent. Within the last 10 days. I looked back at Victoria. This time, her expression changed. Just slightly. Not fear. Not concern. Something tighter. Like she knew I had seen it. You moved fast, I said. She did not answer right away. That silence said more than anything else she had said so far. Because if the permit was that new, then the reclassification had to be even newer. Which meant something else. Something she had not mentioned. Something buried in the timing. I slipped the deed back into the folder and closed it carefully. Because one detail now refused to leave my mind. If everything changed this fast, then there had to be a moment when it was still mine on record, and someone made sure I was not looking. I did not say anything else to her. There was no point. Not yet. I turned away from the fence and walked back to the truck again, slower this time. Every step felt measured. Intentional. The noise from the lake faded behind me, replaced by that steady hum from the ridge. It filled the air now. Constant. Like something that had been running long before. I got here. I opened the truck door and set the folder down carefully. Not tossed. Not rushed. That was important. Because this was the moment everything could split one way or the other. I could push now. Call a lawyer. Make noise. Try to stop them before they finished building. That is what most people would do. That is what they were expecting. I rested my hand on the edge of the door and looked back at the fence. The posts. The chain. The sign. All of it felt deliberate. Not rushed. Not sloppy. That meant planning. Long planning. Which meant they had already prepared for resistance. I closed the door quietly this time. No echo. No attention. Just a soft click. The guard glanced over, then looked away again. That told me he had already decided I was not a threat. Good. I walked a few steps farther from the gate and stopped near the edge of the dirt path. From here, I could see the whole line. Fence cutting across the land. Ridge structure rising above it. Lake stretching out behind everything. It looked complete. Like it had always been this way. That illusion was strong. Strong enough that most people would believe it without question. That was the real play. Not force. Not confrontation. Just making it look official long enough for it to become real. I took a slow breath. The air smelled different here. Less like water. More like fresh cut lumber and fuel. That meant supply runs. Deliveries. They were still bringing things in. Still investing. I glanced at the road that led up toward the ridge. Tire tracks. Deep. Recent. No dust settling yet. That confirmed it. Work was still moving forward. Fast. I reached into my pocket and pulled my phone out again, but this time I did not open the map. I opened the calendar. Scrolled back. 3 days. That was all it had taken for me to be away. 3 days for a fence, a gate, a permit, and a subdivision to appear. That was not coincidence. That was timing. Someone had waited for that window. I locked the screen and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Then I looked back at Victoria one more time. She was still standing there. Still watching. But now there was something else in her posture. Not confidence. Not. Exactly. Something like anticipation. Like she expected the next move. I held her gaze for a second, then broke it. Because she did not need to see what I was thinking. Not yet. I turned toward the truck again and climbed inside. The seat creaked under my weight, familiar and solid. I rested my hands on the wheel but did not start the engine. Not right away. Instead, I looked through the windshield at the fence one more time. Every detail. Every angle. I let it settle into memory. Because if I was going to move next, it had to be clean. Not loud. Not rushed. Clean. I reached over and closed the folder completely this time. Pressed it flat. Locked it in place. Because one decision had already been made in that moment. I was not going to stop them from building. I was going to let them finish. I started the engine but let it idle. The low vibration filled the cab, steady and controlled. Outside, nothing slowed down. Workers kept moving. The generator kept humming. The lake kept reflecting sunlight like it had no idea anything had changed. That was the part one held on to. The land does not lie. Records can. I pulled out of the dirt path slowly, tires rolling over the same ground I had driven 1,000 times. No one stopped me. The guard did not even look twice. That told me everything. They thought I was done. That was the mistake. I drove past the ridge entrance without turning in. Just a glance as I passed. The new structure looked even bigger up close. Glass walls. Fresh decking. A sign near the entrance now read Future Clubhouse. Future. That meant they were not finished yet. Not even close. I kept driving until the lake disappeared behind the trees. The sound of the generator faded, replaced by wind through dry grass. It felt quieter out here. Cleaner. Like I could think again. I pulled over near the old county marker at the edge of my land. A rusted metal post that most people would not notice. I stepped out and walked up to it. The number stamped on it was still visible under years of wear. I had seen this marker before. Years ago. It had always sat exactly where the original survey said it should. I knelt down and brushed dirt away. From the base. The soil here was untouched. No fresh digging. No new concrete. This line had not moved. Not here. That meant something important. The boundary shift was not real on the ground. Only on paper. I stood up slowly. That was the first real crack in everything they built. I pulled my phone out again, this time opening the county records site instead of the map. I searched the permit number I saw earlier. It loaded after a moment. Permit issued 10 days ago. Approved under expedited review. That phrase stood out. Expedited. I tapped into the details. Contractor name. Development group. Legal description of the parcel. I read it once. Then again. Because something did not line up. The legal description referenced a lot number that did not exist in my original deed. Not even close. It was new. Created. I scrolled further. There it was. The filing date for the subdivision. 9 days ago. 1 day before the permit. That sequence mattered. A lot. I stared at the screen, letting the timeline settle into place. They split the land. Then they built. Fast. Too fast for anyone to catch it. Unless they were watching closely. I locked the phone and looked back toward where the lake would be beyond the trees. The wind shifted again, carrying a faint echo of that generator. Still running. Still building. I slipped the phone into my pocket and turned back toward the truck. Because now the picture was clearer. Not complete. But clearer. This was not just a land dispute. This was timing, paperwork, and speed. And speed only works if no one stops it. I opened the truck door and paused for a second before getting in. Because one detail now refused to leave my mind. They rushed everything in under 10 days, which meant there was something they could not afford to have checked. I got back in the truck but did not start driving right away. I just sat there, hands on the wheel, watching the tree line where the lake sat hidden behind it. The engine ticked softly as it cooled. The air felt still. Too still for something that had just changed everything. I pulled the folder back onto my lap and opened it again. Slow this time. Careful. Not flipping through pages, just letting them fall where they wanted. Old survey. Original deed. Hand-marked boundaries. I laid them side by side across the steering wheel. The lines matched each other perfectly. Decades apart, different ink, same result. That was not something you could just correct. I leaned back slightly and closed my eyes for a second. Not to rest. To replay. Fence. Permit. Subdivision. 9 days. Every step stacked too clean. Too fast. That kind of speed leaves gaps. It always does. I opened my eyes and reached for my phone again. Not the map this time. Not the permit page. Something older. I pulled up archived county records. The kind most people never check because they assume the current file is enough. It took a minute to load. Weak signal out here. Then the page filled in. Historical filings. Previous boundary confirmations. I scrolled down. Year after year. No changes. No disputes. Clean record. Until the last entry. 9 days ago. I tapped it. The document opened slowly. The screen flickered once before settling. Legal description. Same new parcel number. Same language. But one line stood out. Referenced source survey, supplemental boundary adjustment. Supplemental. That word did not belong there. Not for land like this. I zoomed in on the attached reference number. Cross-linked document. I tapped it. The file took longer this time. Then it opened. Black and white scan. Low resolution. Someone had uploaded this fast. Too fast to clean it up. I leaned closer to the screen. The lines on that survey looked familiar. Not just similar. Familiar. I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Recognition. I reached over and grabbed my original survey again. The old one. The one with my grandfather's notes in the margin. I held it next to the screen. Same ridge line. Same tree markers. Same slope angle. But the boundary line on the digital version, it had been redrawn. Slightly. Just enough to shift the parcel split. Not a new survey. Not a new measurement. A modification. I stared at that difference for a long second. Because that meant something very specific. They did not discover a new boundary. They altered an old one. I lowered the paper slowly. The truck felt smaller suddenly. Quieter. Like everything outside had moved further away. I looked back toward the trees again, toward the lake I could not see anymore. The generator sound was gone from here. Completely gone. But I could still feel it in my head. That steady hum. Constant. Like the whole thing was still running without me. I slid the phone back into my pocket and closed the folder for the last time. Not tight. Not rushed. Just enough to keep everything in place. Because one detail now stood out clearer than anything else. They did not change my land. They changed the document that proved it existed.